Number 10. The fake heiress. Con woman Anna Sorokin has been called the fake heiress for her role in posing as a wealthy woman in New York. She tricked banks, friends, and others out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. This woman was an elaborate cheater, and according to the BBC, Netflix paid her $320,000 for her story, which they made into a documentary. But this crook was not able to keep all of that money thanks to a special law in New York that prevents criminals from profiting in any way because of their infamy. Even after she was paid by Netflix, the authorities froze her bank accounts and allowed her victims to reclaim their money first. $170,000 was even used to pay back banks. But what exactly did Anna do? In her mid-20s, she told people that she had about $60 million sitting in a trust fund and was trying to create some kind of art foundation. In fact, Anna had pretty much no money at all. She was a magazine intern but stayed at expensive hotels and tricked people into thinking she was rich by having a fancy Instagram account. The mirage she made of an extravagant life tricked people into giving her money. At one point, she even convinced the bank to hand over $100,000 using fake documents. In the end, Anna was charged with 3 counts of grand larceny and an extra count for attempted grand larceny. She spent 3 years in prison. After her release, she was taken into custody again in 2021 by the immigration authorities and will likely be deported to Germany in the coming weeks. Number 9. Forged masterpieces. Police in Spain seized 3 forged paintings from a cheating art dealer who'd been trying to sell the fake paintings as 3 masterpieces by legendary artists El Greco, Francesco de Goya, and Amedeo Modigliani. The total asking price for the 3 canvases was $14.7 million. The forge master was planning to sell the fake art to buyers from the black market in Germany, Mexico, and Switzerland. His deal was to take 10% commission. The buyers had already been prepared to purchase the pieces, but of course, this guy would have ended up taking 100% of the money. Somehow, the Historical Heritage Group with the Vatican Police and the National Police Corps in Spain got wind of the deal and stomped it out. The fraudulent art dealer lives in Toledo, and he will likely be prosecuted on some kind of charges. According to Antonio Lopez from the Historical Heritage Group, forged resales are a massive problem for police agencies and pose problems for the legitimate art dealers. It's not exactly clear how this guy managed to forge paintings worth millions of dollars, but after getting busted, he probably won't be trying to do it again. Number 8. Car thief crook. A very greasy con artist was recently arrested after duping a poor woman out of $5,000 and conning others out of their vehicles. This is Pedro Horta, 72 years old and a complete dirtbag. He was in a diner in Coral Gables when he met a waitress. Pedro befriended the waitress, introduced himself as Marcos, and asked if she would like to be his personal driver. He claimed that his cataracts were getting so bad that he couldn't drive and needed someone to chauffeur him around. The waitress then told Pedro that she did not have a suitable car for such a task. But don't worry, he said, he could get her an excellent deal on a car with $10,000, and she would only have to pay $5,000. But as you may have already guessed, after the waitress handed over the $5,000, Pedro took off with her cash and she never saw him again. But this fraud gets even more disgusting. According to the police, Pedro then met another victim just a few weeks later after responding to a Facebook Marketplace ad for a 2004 Mercedes-Benz. Pedro took the car for a test drive with its owner, but when the owner of the car got out of the passenger seat, Pedro quickly slammed the door and drove away, leaving the victim in the middle of nowhere. He did it again with another victim who was selling a BMW yet again on Facebook Marketplace. He basically did the same thing, ditching the owner and driving off in the stolen car. But like all stupid criminals, Pedro was soon caught by police. They captured him driving around in the stolen BMW. Pedro will now be spending his twilight years behind bars. Number 7. Preying on the elderly. A con artist from India was recently sentenced to spend 15 years in jail after stealing from the elderly. But this was no ordinary con artist. This was a woman who posed as a massage therapist and told elderly people that her unique massage techniques could help them ease their pain. But instead of easing their pain, she relieved them of their personal goods. Inside of a regional court, Charlene Singh begged for mercy from the judge, cried, and fought tooth and nail to be forgiven. However, the magistrate told her it was too late and referred to Singh as a habitual offender. The elderly people who hired her never even got their massage. She would tell her clients that they needed to remove their jewelry because she was going to use a magnetic band to help relieve their pain. She would then steal their jewelry, tell them she was going to her car to get some special ointment, and then she would just never return. Of course, her victims began posting images of her on social media, and the police eventually caught her, but not before she stole jewelry from at least 50 victims. Unfortunately, none of the stolen goods were ever recovered, including objects that held massive sentimental value such as wedding rings and religious items. Conning old people? That's just messed up. Have you ever been tricked by a con artist? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, if you're enjoying this video, hit that thumbs up button, and then don't forget to subscribe too. Number 6. The Bikini Killer. Charles Soberaj is the star of Netflix's new documentary and one of the most legendary con men in recent history. Charles was handsome and fluent in many languages, and has been compared to a real-life Hannibal Lecter. He was once one of the most wanted criminals in Asia and was responsible for luring at least 12 young backpackers in Southeast Asia to their deaths during the 1970s. Charles worked by befriending young tourists along the hippie trail. He would tell them where to eat and what to do on vacation. And then he would eventually drug them and either stab them or choke them to death. He was joined by his accomplice and girlfriend, a French-Canadian girl named Marie-Andre Leclerc, and an Indian henchman named A.J. Chowdhury. Charles and his team would kill the tourists and then steal their passports and money, and sometimes even assume their identities. According to the writers of the Netflix series, they had to omit some of his exploits because they were too bizarre to be believed. Charles was caught in 1976 after drugging French engineering students, but he somehow escaped jail 3 times. He was arrested again in 2003 in Nepal for the murder of 2 people, where he remains in jail to this very day. Number 5. The Environmental Con Man. Charles Gilbert Murphy was charged for an elaborate fraud scheme in the 1990s after squirreling $350,000 out of his victims. The scheme made him rich, but ultimately landed him in jail in North Carolina until 2003. But in 2021, he was sentenced again to another 6 years in prison after pleading guilty to aggravated identity theft and wire fraud, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of North Carolina. This time, Charles was ordered to pay $909,763 in restitution. This newest fraud scheme was even more complex than the first. Charles created 6 companies, all with their own bank accounts, by using the names of his family members, including his daughters and his wife. He was supposed to be offering environmental cleanup services and selling coffee machines to gas stations. He used his companies to apply for loans, and he solicited money from entrepreneurs who wanted to use his fake services. But like all con men, Charles never provided a single service. He sucked up all the money and was eventually caught by the FBI for his fraud, which he pled guilty to in February of 2020. The only reason he wasn't in jail sooner was because of the COVID pandemic. But that excuse only worked for so long, and this environmental con man is now rotting behind bars. Number 4. Hollywood Con Queen. An Indonesian man nicknamed the Con Queen of Hollywood successfully managed to swindle hundreds of thousands of dollars out of amateur actors. This guy allegedly impersonated female executives from Hollywood to defraud aspiring actors. He impersonated a boss from Lucasfilm, a former Sony movie chief, and even an ex-boss from Paramount Studios. He would convince his victims to fly to Indonesia, where they were then forced to give upfront payments to the con man for movie projects that would never actually happen. And apparently when the victims complained or became upset, he threatened to cut them into pieces. Everything was going swell for the con man until the coronavirus pandemic, when travel bans stopped his potential victims from being able to travel to Indonesia. He then tried to start a scam using fake training videos, but he was soon arrested in the United Kingdom thanks to help from a private investigating firm called K2 Integrity. But even though he was arrested in England, the United States still wants a piece of him. The FBI is currently trying to extradite the con man and charge him with aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Number 3. The King's Daughter. Police in Spain recently cracked a multi-million-dollar pyramid scheme and identified the mastermind behind the operation, who'd been posing as the illegitimate daughter of the former King of Spain. The scam involved false real estate purchases. Members of this organization would persuade their victims to purchase pieces of property at a discounted price, without them ever viewing the property. These people would provide false proof of ownership and then pocket every last scrap of cash. It was easy for her to assume the identity of a royal heiress to gain the trust of victims. According to Spain's Guardia Civil, The members of the criminal organization often used fake or stolen identities. Each of their hundreds of victims was robbed of up to $48,000. As for the head of the organization, she's currently confined to a wheelchair and has already served time for other offenses in the past. This woman lives a luxurious lifestyle and apparently has at least 15 personal staff members to take care of her. About $72,000 in cash was seized as part of the operation, along with roughly $60,000 in jewelry and 10 bank accounts that had allegedly been used to launder nearly $2 million. As of right now, it's not clear what kind of prison sentences the members of this group are looking at or what will likely happen to the fake daughter of the king. Number 2. The rent scam. In Canada, a not-so-clever scam artist cheated potential renters out of thousands of dollars. This was all done through online ads. The con artist convinced his victims to put a huge deposit down for a piece of property that he didn't actually own. He used photos and details from a house that wasn't his. The victims would then send money online, and by the time they were supposed to move in, the con man had vanished. The unsuspecting victims would then show up to move into that home that was already being lived in. According to residents of Murrayville, Lillian and Dwayne Seymour, renters were knocking on their front door trying to move into their house for over a month, causing them a massive headache. And while it's not clear if the con man who made this couple's life miserable for a month was ever caught, someone was indeed arrested recently for running a very similar con during the exact same time period. I mean, it really could have even been the same guy. He was a local 39-year-old man who, according to the RCMP, was arrested in Winnipeg, all the way on the other side of the country for doing the exact same thing. The point of this story is renters beware. Number 1. Phone Scam Revenge. An IRS phone scammer was just sentenced to spend the next 20 years in prison. This is the sweetest revenge for anyone who has ever had to suffer through one of those annoying fake phone calls. This guy is an Indian national but was extradited from Singapore to the United States in 2019, where he was charged with defrauding United States citizens out of millions of dollars. He operated his phone scam from between 2013 and 2016 and has already pled guilty. The scheme consisted of a team of scammers calling victims in the United States and then impersonating agents from the IRS. Scammers would then tell their victims that they needed to pay a fake tax bill immediately or they would face imminent arrest. And while you may be wondering what kind of crazy person would immediately hand over their financial information to a stranger on the phone, well, it was pretty much everybody. The scam was a huge success. It was so successful that according to Forbes, the United States Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration referred to it as the biggest scam of its kind in history. Well, anyone who did get scammed over the phone can at least take some comfort in the fact that the mastermind behind it all will be rotting in jail until probably 2040. Sometimes it's better to not admit your own wrongdoings. At least that's probably what Danielle would say if she were alive today. When Danielle admitted to her boyfriend that she'd been cheating on him, the boyfriend went into a fit of rage. 34-year-old Shmuel has since been charged with murdering his girlfriend Danielle. But it didn't look like murder at first. Authorities believe that Danielle had jumped to her death from her 6th-floor apartment where she lived in Queens, New York. She was quickly rushed to Jamaica Hospital, where unfortunately she was pronounced dead. Police started suspecting foul play when they found her hair all over her apartment as if she'd been in a scuffle. Investigators also discovered a dent in one of her walls. Furthermore, they went on to discover that some of the fractures she had suffered in her skull were inconsistent with those of a fall. But before the investigation even needed to go any further, Shmuel admitted to killing her. He apparently put her in a headlock after hearing about her cheating. She wouldn't let him see her phone, and so he lost all control and resorted to physical violence. She fought back but wasn't as strong as her former lover, and Shmuel ultimately threw her out of the apartment and down to the street below, where she then splattered all over the road. Shmuel claimed it was not his intention to kill her, but all he could see was red. Number 9. Glitter Revenge. A woman on TikTok got revenge on her cheating boyfriend in a very messy and peculiar way. She didn't key his car or throw him off a balcony. Instead, she threw glitter on everything in her cheating boyfriend's apartment. And glitter, of course, is the herpes of the crafting world. This woman actually went out and got huge containers of the sparkly confetti and then threw them all over his furniture and clothes. She threw blue glitter all over his carpet, red glitter in his clothes and duvet, and more blue glitter on his towels, in his sink, and everything in his bathroom. She even dumped green glitter into his shoes. Of course, she definitely could have done a lot worse than this, but it probably took the cheater a whole lot of time to clean his apartment after she was through with him. And that must have been quite satisfying for her. He was probably finding glitter on his stuff for years after this. That's how hard it is to get rid of this stuff. Since uploading the video on TikTok, the revenge seeker has gotten some mixed reactions, from people praising her as a hero to others condemning her for her childish behavior. What's your opinion? Number 8. Grandma's Revenge. A 94-year-old sassy grandma named Doris recently took to social media to recount the tale of revenge she'd gotten on an ex-lover many years ago. Doris told the exciting story of how she made a fool out of the girl that her husband had been cheating on her with. The video has since gone viral with over 13 million views. Doris learned about the affair and took her husband's side chick out for drinks. She then worked her hardest to get the girl extremely intoxicating while she herself stayed sober. In fact, Doris got the woman so wasted that she eventually passed out with her face down on a plate of food. She was unconscious and unresponsive with her face smashed into her dinner. Then Doris called her husband and told him to come pick the drunk girl up. The girl was embarrassed for being such a drunk, and the husband was embarrassed for getting caught having an affair. Doris never said what happened after the incident, but she's 94 years old and alive and happy, which of course is the best revenge in the end. What do you think happened after that incident? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. Power Drill Payback. When an unknown boyfriend caught his girlfriend cheating, he decided to have a bit of fun with a power drill. He didn't use it on her, but instead used the power drill to rip apart her floorboards and cause massive damage to the girl's apartment. He also used an electric floor scraper to destroy the hardwood flooring beyond repair. This revenge was inspired by the fact that the boyfriend had paid $2,000 to put in the hardwood floors for his cheating girlfriend. He even installed them himself. The video was uploaded online and received over 3.3 million views in a short period of time. Then he uploaded the reaction that his girlfriend had to finding out that her floors had been ripped apart. The clip showed the woman screaming at him, calling him childish, and then slapping him in the face through his car window. She even went so far as to shout, "No wonder I cheated on you." And to top it all off, the boyfriend then decided there had to be a grand finale. He took all of the torn up floorboards and set them on fire outside. The last video had the message, with the TikToker concluding, "So my message to my ex is, since you already walked all over my heart, have fun walking all over nothing." Considering just how many people watched the videos, it's probably going to be a bit tougher for either of them to find a date in the next couple of weeks. Number 6. Burn it down. In another fiery fit of rage, a jealous boyfriend was recently busted setting fire to his girlfriend's pub after he accused her of cheating on him with another man. This relationship had only been going on for about 6 months. Carl Banks confronted his partner, Leanne Brownbridge, about the cheating, but she denied it. But he didn't believe her, of course. And in a fit of rage, Carl went to the pub Earl of Balcarres that she owned and lived in and set the place ablaze. But what makes this story so bizarre is that Leanne had been in the hospital with her sick daughter at the time of Carl's arson. When she returned from the hospital back to her home/pub, she found that all her worldly possessions had been destroyed in the fire. She had nowhere to sleep, her business was in ruins, and her sick daughter were now homeless. As for the jealous boyfriend, Carl was quickly arrested and sentenced to spend 3 years and 4 months locked up. The big icing on the cake in this case is that Leanne hadn't been cheating. She hadn't been with another man at all. In fact, she'd been at the hospital the entire time with her sick child. Carl was obviously a bit of a lunatic, and apparently the whole thing turned nasty after he started drinking Jägermeister by himself. That was when he started accusing Leanne of sleeping with a man named Jim Bob. And to make things even worse, Leanne had absolutely no insurance. Number 5. OnlyFans Revenge. A woman who goes by the name Willow Sky got some unusual revenge on her cheating boyfriend thanks to the controversial phenomenon called OnlyFans. According to Willow Sky, her ex-boyfriend was viciously abusive and would tell her things like, "No one will ever find you attractive." For years, this boyfriend made her feel defeated and beat her confidence into the ground, all while cheating on her the whole time. Narcissistic much? Well, this girl is now making about $45,000 a month by sharing dicey photos of herself on OnlyFans. And she's only 23 years old. She has over 12,000 followers on Instagram and thousands of men paying to get a glimpse of her on the internet. Her ex-boyfriend is almost certainly jealous and furious, which, depending on who you ask, is by far the best revenge. Willow Sky is now filthy rich, and she's now in a healthy relationship with an accepting and supportive boyfriend, and her cheating ex is probably kicking himself for being such a great big loser. Number 4. Double Revenge. Jennifer Garadot discovered that her husband was cheating on her and came up with a plan for revenge so sinister that you're hardly going to believe it. The scorned and slightly psycho wife took a train from Delaware to the home of her husband's mistress, located in a quiet town in Pennsylvania. Police Lieutenant Christopher Flanagan says that she arrived at the mistress's home wearing a wig and a disguise. Jennifer then smashed through the front door and sat patiently waiting for the mistress to arrive at home. The very second the mistress walked through the door, Jennifer shot her dead with a Taurus Tracker .357 revolver. By the time the police arrived, both women were lying dead just inside the door. And who did the police find loitering outside the scene? It was the man who made it all happen, Mark Garadot, who was supposed to meet his mistress for dinner, but she never showed. Concerned, he drove all the way to her house to see what happened. Well, what happened was that Mark went from being a man of many women to probably being traumatized with guilt for the rest of his life. Number 3. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Cheater. A Japanese woman caught her husband cheating, and to get revenge, she sold his collectible Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading cards in an online auction. Ouch! Of course, this is something that would probably only happen in Japan. According to Yahoo News, the bidding started at less than a cent for 26 boxes of collectible cards, 25 of which were unopened. Many of the boxes contained limited edition boosters worth a ton of money. The wife claimed that she didn't want to make any kind of crazy profit, she only wanted a fair deal in compensation for her husband's unfaithful behavior. There was never any report on how much money the Japanese woman made for the cards or what the exact situation was with her husband, but at last we heard the collection had 350 bids and was going for $188,220. Number 2. Vengeful father. An angry father in India took things a little too far when he found out the boy his daughter was dating had been cheating on her. In a rampage unlike any other, the father murdered 6 members of the cheating boy's family to get revenge. This was the most brutal vengeance imaginable, especially considering 3 of the deceased were women, and one of them was only 2 years old. After the cheating boy did his cheating business, he even married another girl, disrespecting the man's daughter even more. Rather than seek revenge on the boy who actually did the cheating, the father went to the boy's house and hacked to death every last person he could find. He then turned himself into the police and is now facing judgment. Talk about taking things too far. Number 1. The husband killer. On an unmaintained county road in Texas, Robert Pointer was shot in the head while sitting in his wife's Jeep. Robert's wife, Chasey Pointer, told the police that she had called her husband for assistance after her Jeep had got stuck in the mud. She then told police that when her husband got into the vehicle, a man came out of the darkness and fired the deadly shot. As you can imagine, the police were skeptical about her story. There aren't many murderers just hanging around on the side of dirt roads late at night. Police Sergeant Shane Meek said that Robert's wife was having a bit of trouble with her story as the investigation went on. It was obvious she was lying about something. She later told investors that she did in fact know the identity of the shadow man who had killed her husband. It was her secret lover, a man named Michael Garza. In the end, it turned out that Robert and his wife had been having trouble. She'd been having an affair, and then she and Michael worked together to kill Robert and cash in on his life insurance policy. It was actually an assassination. Robert's wife was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 3 decades. In 2005, Natalie Holloway mysteriously vanished while on a vacation in Aruba. She was an 18-year-old girl from Alabama celebrating her high school graduation with a group of her good friends. On May 30th, she left a local bar by the name of Carlos and Charlie's. She was last seen by her friends getting into a gray Honda with a 17-year-old Dutch boy named Vandersloot and 2 of his friends. When questioned by the police after the girl's disappearance, Vandersloot claimed that he had dropped her off back at her hotel. But the surveillance footage proved that he was a liar and that he had not in fact done that, and he was taken into custody. In the end, Vandersloot had to be released because Natalie's body was never found and the police didn't have enough evidence. Over 15 years later, and Natalie's body still hasn't been found. But Vandersloot has since been charged with murdering a young girl in Peru and is serving a 28-year prison sentence in the South American country. The general consensus here is that he definitely killed Natalie all those years ago, but disposed of the body in such a way that she still hasn't been found. Number 9. Shark bite vacation. Just recently in 2021, a young boy, only 9 years old, was recovering at a hospital in Florida after suffering a shark bite while on vacation. According to the boy's mother, it was straight out of a horror movie. The boy was on a family trip with his mother and her husband. All they wanted was a quiet getaway for just a couple days somewhere warm. They flew to Miami Beach, and their hotel wasn't ready for them to check in, so the family took a nice stroll through the sand to waste some time. Christine was holding her son's hand as they walked through the water, not even 2 feet deep, and then all hell broke loose. A massive wave came in and pulled the kid a little bit further into the water, and that wave had also brought with it a shark. The shark was then propelled by the wave into the child, and probably instinctively tried to eat him. The shark took a huge chunk of the boy's shoulder and then swam away back into the ocean. The family had been on vacation for less than 10 minutes when their kid was nearly chomped in half by an angry shark. Not the vacation we were planning. I was worried about traveling with COVID, and COVID is terrible too. But this is just every parent's worst nightmare, and it's something you would expect to happen to somebody else, not to you, the mother said. Luckily, the child made a full recovery and won't be suffering any long-term damage. But it is safe to say their next family trip might be to a ski resort instead. Number 8. Kidnapped in Mexico. Jennifer and Frank Masabke got engaged and traveled to Mexico in May of 2017 to scout out potential wedding locations. The couple rented a car from a company in Mexico City and were driving for only about an hour when another vehicle smashed into them from behind. When Frank got out of the car to talk to the driver, a group of men with weapons appeared out of nowhere and took them hostage. This is according to the police report that was filed with officials in Mexico City. Frank and Jennifer were kidnapped. The men forced them to remove their jewelry and then drove them to a second location. Once at this new location, the kidnappers demanded that they call someone to get a ransom in United States money. Miraculously, the couple managed to avoid being brutally beaten and abused. Somehow they freed themselves and ran for the hills and found police officials. They then returned to the United States as quickly as possible, where Jennifer needed to have surgery done on her nose, which had been broken while fending off one of her attackers. Suffice it to say, Jennifer and Frank will probably not be hosting their wedding in Mexico after being kidnapped an hour into their vacation. Number 7. Trapped in the jungle. 2 women from Reno, Nevada ventured into the Amazon rainforest in Peru on March 13th. They were planning to help the people living in a small river village called Ayachucho with opening up their high school. The Good Samaritan women arrived in the village with toys for the children, school supplies, and things like blankets and clothes and shoes. But what these women had never expected was for the coronavirus to lock down the world. Their plans to help were completely derailed, and by the time they arrived in the village, Peru was totally shut down. Both girls were left stranded in the Amazon jungle. They were unable to travel by boat, plane, or over land. What should have been a wonderful vacation turned into a nightmare as the girls struggled to get back to the United States. They tried to get up the river in a boat, but were turned away, and in the end, they had to get special travel documentation from the government just to leave the Amazon. And all the while, they were stuck deep in the jungle. Of course, they did eventually get out, but it took workers from the U.S. Embassy and the government of Peru, as well as locals from the village and a small town on the Amazon border just to get them to an airport. The Amazon jungle, it's probably one of the worst places to get stranded during the pandemic. Do you know of anyone who was stuck somewhere else during COVID-19? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. The whopping hospital bill. A network engineer from Melbourne, Australia decided to spend his Christmas in Thailand. And there really is no better place on earth to enjoy Christmas Day than Koh Phangan. This fellow woke up in the morning feeling good and decided he wanted to go for a run just like he did every morning. But then he was hit by a sudden rainstorm. In his attempt to find shelter, he tripped and fell into the street. He was left with a couple of cuts on his leg, but nothing that looked too serious. There wasn't a lot of bleeding and he didn't need stitches, but just to be safe, he went to the local hospital and had his wounds cleaned and stitched anyway. And then 2 days later, this guy's foot got incredibly swollen. It turned out that the cuts had given him an infection, and he was now in serious condition. The infection wouldn't go away, and he had to undergo several very painful treatments, including getting the tissue from his foot cut off. This was a pretty bad vacation for the Australian. And when all was said and done, he did survive the infection, but at a cost of $42,500 in hospital bills. A nurse was sent from Australia to bring him back since the poor guy couldn't even walk. Number 5. Mistaken identity. Tony Smith was a British pensioner who dreamed of going on a luxurious and tropical vacation to Cancun in Mexico. This guy was 66 years old when he traveled from West Sussex to Cancun with his wife, Carol. But their dream vacation turned into an absolute nightmare when at the Cancun airport, Tony was mistaken for an international criminal. Apparently, his doppelganger was up to no good. He spent 3 days locked in a small room at the airport. deprived of windows and human decency and treated as though he was a serial killer. Tony was told that his name was on a list of international criminals under the watchful eye of the United States, which is why he got detained. Tony was then photographed. He had his fingerprints taken, and at the end of 3 miserable days, he was deported without any proper explanation for what happened to him. His wife was forced to travel alone to the hotel, where she tried to get help from the British consulate, and they didn't give her any. Tony Smith learned that apparently he had the same name as several wanted criminals, although not the same birth date. Tony and his wife were reunited in England soon after the incident, and they'll probably never go on another vacation again. Number 4. Cockroaches and stained sheets. A family that paid $11,000 for a dream trip to Jamaica were left in shambles after suffering a horrible ordeal. First of all, the teenage daughters were offered illegal drugs at the hotel pool. Then the mother of the family was mortified when she witnessed drunk people twerking at the pool and blasting rap music. Everyone was disturbed to find not only stained sheets in their hotel room, but also cockroaches scurrying around on the floor. The trip had been booked as an all-inclusive 5-star vacation through a holiday provider. And upon checking into their room, the family discovered blood on their bed sheets, dead cockroaches pretty much everywhere, and it was no better than a 1-star accommodation. $11,000 went down the toilet, and no one had any kind of fun. So let this be a lesson to everyone who spends big bucks with a holiday provider. Not a single penny was given back to the family, and they were left with a sour taste in their mouths. Maybe they'll laugh about it someday. Number 3. Too white to fly. A teenage girl was recently denied entry onto an airplane because she was too white to fly. A family's dream holiday was ruined when they arrived at the Manchester airport excited to be on their way to the Maldives Islands for the vacation of a lifetime. The father of the family had been saving his pay for years to provide an amazing trip for his wife and his children. But the flight they needed to take to Dubai would not allow them to board because the 14-year-old daughter of the family appeared too pale. They tried to explain that she simply had a pale complexion, but the airline workers would not listen. They claimed that because she looked so white, she was probably sick and was not fit to be on the airplane with other people. This was Etihad, one of the biggest airlines belonging to the United Arab Emirates. The airline then called for a medic to examine the girl, but still refused to let her on board unless she immediately produced a letter from a physician claiming that she had simply had a white complexion and was not medically ill. And as completely insane as it sounds, a family friend had to phone their family physician and get a letter emailed to them just in time for them to board the flight. The poor girl was probably extremely embarrassed after being put on blast. The family did eventually make it to their vacation destination, but not without a whole lot of hassle and a story that the pale girl will remember for the rest of her life. Do you think she started spray tanning after this? Number 2. The sinking party. A tourist boat packed with over 150 passengers, most of whom were on vacation, capsized near the Colombian city of Medellin, leaving at least 6 confirmed dead and 15 missing. This was a party boat where young vacation goers could let loose and have an awesome time while visiting Colombia. Well, something bad happened and the boat began sinking abruptly. There was a large explosion heard, and within seconds, the pressure of the boat being sucked underwater caused those on board to also be sucked underneath the sinking ship. Nearby jet skis and recreational boats rushed to the scene to try and help, but they couldn't prevent all the unfortunate deaths. One of the survivors, Lorena Salazar, told local media, "Those on the first and second floors sank immediately. All we could do was scream and call for help. It was completely chaotic." Only 134 people survived the sinking, and 3 of them needed to be hospitalized in serious condition. To this day, nobody has any idea why the boat sank. But according to USA Today, the boat had almost sunk a few months prior to the incident and may not have been properly fixed before returning to the water and being filled with foreign tourists again. Number 1. Beach nightmare. A hospital worker from Montreal, Canada, traveled to Cuba for her vacation in 2020. Antoinette was 52 years old and mother of 4 children, and the day after she arrived in the small resort town of Veradero, she went missing. Antoinette was then found the next day murdered on the beach. She was discovered buried under a few feet of sand with marks all over her body, proof that something violent had happened to her. This is especially tragic considering the hospital worker flew to Cuba after dealing with an excess of work because of the coronavirus pandemic. She really deserved a break. What she got instead was brutally murdered just one day into her vacation. About a week after her body was found, a suspect was arrested in connection to the case, and as of right now, we don't know the suspect's name or their motive. In one of the most jaw-dropping incidences of yoga gone wrong, a student fell roughly 75 feet while trying to complete an extreme yoga pose on the railing of her balcony. Alexa Terrazas was just 23 years old when she attempted to perform the obviously very dangerous stunt, precariously 6 floors above the hard concrete below. A photograph was captured right before the fall that just about took her life. You can see her upside down with her thighs balanced on the balcony. And that was the moment she slipped and plummeted to what almost certainly should have been her death. Medics had to battle for 11 hours to save this girl's life at the local hospital she was sent to in the Mexican state of Nuevo León. Miraculously, she survived the dangerous fall, though doctors did say it could take up to 3 years for her to start walking again. Her legs literally had to be reconstructed. The most insane part is that Alexa was known for trying out these bold stunts. Neighbors and friends had witnessed her doing similar things before. So it really makes you wonder if once her legs are healed, Alexa will then climb back onto the balcony and try this pose again. Number 9. Suffers a stroke. In October of 2017, Rebecca Lee from Maryland suffered an enormous stroke because of an accident while practicing yoga. Rebecca had been attempting a pose known as the hollow back handstand. The pose was to be photographed and uploaded online for all her followers on social media to see. Unfortunately, things didn't go exactly according to plan. Rebecca tore an artery while trying to perfect the pose, which led to her having a stroke. She immediately experienced blurred vision and couldn't control her arm. The stroke lasted for about 5 minutes. And then, according to Rebecca herself, her head began to hurt a lot. She immediately knew that her suffering was much different than just an ordinary headache. Still, she couldn't have imagined that what happened to her was actually a stroke. In the days following the accident, Rebecca noticed that her eye was drooping and that her pupils were different sizes, and she was eventually forced to go to the hospital by her concerned husband. She told SWNS. The doctor on staff came into the little room we were waiting in and said in a monotone voice, "Well, my dear, you had a stroke." She continued. Kevin and I both let out a little laugh because we thought he had to be kidding. There was no way that someone my age and my health could have had a stroke. But he responded to our laughter in a solemn silence, and his face said it all. Even though Rebecca was in outstanding shape, she ate nothing but healthy food and was only 40 years old. She suffered a stroke and is still plagued by headaches and memory loss. Number 8. Paralyzed for life. An unlicensed dance studio recently got into some trouble after surveillance footage captured the terrifying moment that a young girl was left paralyzed while trying to perform a risky yoga pose. This girl was only 4 years old, and she's now paralyzed for life. She was doing the back bridge pose with dozens of other children in class when she collapsed. She was taken to the hospital immediately with no feeling in her legs and a lot of confusion. She was pretty out of it. This incident happened in the Henan province of China. According to Dr. Kui Lin from the Zhengzhou Children's Hospital, the girl seriously damaged her spine because of the difficult move being taught to her by her dance instructor. The injury was probably a spinal contusion. The doctor went on to say that things were not looking optimistic for the young girl, as she will almost definitely be paralyzed in her lower body for the remainder of her life, which is literally her entire life because she was so young when the tragic freak accident occurred. It's being suggested that the teacher of the dance studio was not professional enough to teach children's yoga, and the dance studio has absolutely no certificates. As of right now, we don't know if the instructor responsible has been jailed or even fined. Do you think the unsolicited yoga teacher should be held responsible for this young girl's now paralyzed life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 7. Yoga drowning. A woman in New York recently drowned while participating in a yoga class. And as absolutely insane as this sounds, it's absolutely true. Of course, this was stand-up paddleboard yoga, with the class being held on Long Island. Lisa was an inexperienced paddleboarder who tried to help another woman in the class who got stuck in the strong current. Lisa then got caught on a bridge piling and fell into the water, according to South Hold Police Chief Martin Flatley. Lisa was tethered to her board and unable to free herself while the board kept her submerged underwater. A jogger who witnessed the scene while passing by quickly jumped in and dragged Lisa to dry land. But sadly, it was too late. Despite rescue attempts by hospital paramedics and the fire department rescue squad, Lisa was pronounced dead when she arrived at the hospital. Is it really necessary to do yoga in these risky conditions? Number 6. Hot yoga death. A British mother who paid over $13,000 to take a course in hot yoga has died under extremely mysterious circumstances in Mexico. The class was to be taught by the since-disgraced yoga instructor BIKRAM. The course was to be 9 weeks long and take place in the hot and humid conditions of Acapulco, Mexico. The mom, whose name was Phyllis, traveled across seas all the way to Acapulco from Great Britain. Not long after she arrived on October 2nd, she began to feel sick, but was not taken to see a doctor until almost 2 weeks later on October 14th. Her son arrived to take care of her 2 days later, but she died almost immediately upon his landing in Mexico. What's really horrifying is that nobody really knows how she died. This mom was in excellent health and was quite experienced with hot yoga. She became sick for unknown reasons, was dumped at the hospital 2 weeks too late, and then abandoned in Acapulco by the unconcerned yoga staff members. She paid over $13,000 to be left behind like a dirty diaper. According to the report from the Daily Mail, Phyllis likely died of heart failure due to sepsis. Worst yoga retreat ever. Number 5. Yoga killing spree. A completely ordinary Friday afternoon at a yoga studio turned into an absolute nightmare of unimaginable proportions when a disturbed gunman walked into the studio, gunned down 2 innocent ladies while they practiced yoga, and injured 5 others. This was the most horrific shooting that ever happened in a yoga studio, and the fact that it happened at all is frankly quite shocking. The attacker's name was Scott, and he's 40 years old. He had gone into the yoga studio posing as a potential customer before opening fire on 2 women in Tallahassee. The 2 women that were killed were later identified as a student and a faculty member from Florida State University. According to CBC News, Scott had previously been accused of harassing females and had apparently been charged for inappropriately touching women's behinds. This guy was obviously a lunatic, and his lunacy took him over the edge. And it kind of looks like nobody's safe in Florida, whether you're in a yoga studio or just minding your own business on the street. Number 4. The Bikram Yoga Assaults. Bikram Chowdhury is the infamous yoga instructor from the popularized Bikram Yoga and made an absolute fortune in the process. Unfortunately for a lot of his students, this guy was also apparently a deviant. He's been hit with at least 6 allegations of inappropriate behavior with his students. The Indian-born yoga instructor is around 70 years old. And in his defense to these accusations, he actually said, according to the New York Post, that women liked him and that he really wanted to be involved with his students. He wouldn't need to assault them. This is a pretty shady defense, especially considering that Sarah Braun, one of his students, came forward saying that he told her that she would have no career as a yoga instructor unless she did what he told her, and what he told her to do was wildly inappropriate. Another woman that took a class with him also came forward and said this about it. "I looked him in the eyes and pushed him off me and I said, 'I can do this by myself,'" she told CNN. And he said, "No, you can't. There's no way." I got up and I left the room. There's actually a documentary about this creep called Bikram, Yogi Guru Predator. Have you seen it? I have. It's pretty interesting. In any case, a lot of women had pretty crummy experiences trying to become yoga instructors thanks to this guy. Number 3. Break a leg. A man in Ireland fractured his thigh bone while trying to do the seated yoga position called the Mariichi Asana. This guy was 38 years old and had already been practicing yoga for 2 years, but unfortunately he wound up in the hospital with a broken leg. This happened during his morning yoga class, with the position requiring him to sit down and have his knee bent up to his chest with his torso bent towards the floor. If that sounds uncomfortable to you, well, you're not the only one. When the Irishman got into the position, he heard a disgusting cracking sound and felt a huge pain in his right femur, which of course is his thigh bone. The pain was so bad that he collapsed and needed an ambulance to take him to the hospital, where it turned out he had fractured his bone 4 inches above his knee joint. While these kinds of injuries definitely happen, they're pretty rare. What's really strange about it is the Irishman had been practicing yoga every morning for at least an hour, and still he wasn't prepared for such a contortion. Imagine bending your body into such a cruel position that you literally fracture your own bone. Whoa, ouch. Number 2. Backflip gone wrong. A 22-year-old singer and dancer recently died in Bengaluru's Victoria Hospital after battling for his life for 8 long and miserable days. This guy hadn't been doing yoga, but he had been trying to complete a backflip. If you ask me, backflips and yoga are basically the same thing, and apparently they're equally as dangerous. While trying to perform the backflip on video for the popular app TikTok, he landed on his neck, injured his spinal cord, and shortly after he died. This guy broke himself all for the sake of getting a bit of attention on TikTok. At least with people who are practicing yoga, they're trying to become healthier. This poor young man was not the only person to recently be injured trying to get attention on TikTok with a dangerous stunt. There was also a 2-year-old child in Wuhan who just sustained major injuries to their head after a relative tried to flip the kid 180 degrees, like he'd seen done in a TikTok video. I recommend not trying these stunts if you have no previous experience. Number 1. A broken back. Jennifer Pond was in a standing twist pose when she heard a loud popping sound. The event planner then felt a shooting pain in her right leg and hip, which she at first thought was just a pulled muscle. But not very long after, the pain became unbearable. Jennifer went for an x-ray and discovered she'd broken the interarticularis bone located at the base of her spine. The injury, which didn't seem that bad at first, worsened until it weakened her backbone to such a point that it slipped forward and gave her a condition known as spondylolisthesis. Jennifer, who was a resident of Canada, suffered such pain from her injury that she was forced to walk with a limp and can no longer go long distances. She was in agony for 4 years until she very recently got a spinal fusion surgery. She has since started walking better, but Jennifer is still a long way from a full recovery. And all of this misery just to twist her body into a weird pose. It really makes you question how safe yoga really is. Thanks for watching. Do you still want to do yoga after hearing these stories? Have you had a bad experience with yoga yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe button for more awesome content like this. We'll see you next time.